Welcome to the Post Shift Podcast, your raw look at the hospitality industry, brought to you by SHC. What has happened in Post Shifters? Welcome back to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Sean Sewell. Really looking forward to this chat. Going to be talking to Jim Taylor about his new book, Bold Operations. He's for the Benchmark 60 in Vancouver. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because flicking through his book, I got late Saturday, and I'm not a very fast reader. So I wanted to sort of get through a few things, and I think there's so many things that we do that align together. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation because we just started talking in the green room. I'm like, wait a second, no, this conversation is way too good. We shouldn't be doing this offline. We need to put it out there in the universe so that people can actually listen. Welcome, Jim. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this chat because the episode I just dropped today at 9 a.m. was how much it actually cost to set up a restaurant. And through some like hard and fast data points for people, because I think sometimes the industry just goes, oh, it's going to cost this much. And you're like, well, it's going to cost you more than that. And over the last couple of weeks, I've been trying to do more actionable steps for people to like how to hire the right team, how to keep the right team. And just flicking through your book and sort of reading a chapter here and there, it really does align with a lot of my style. And as we were talking off thing, which we'll get into, how the new generation have options, and we're still treating a lot of our staff the same way that the general consensus in the industry is still treating staff the same way we did pre-pandemic. And instead of changing and evolving, we're still complaining about staff shortages and everything. But welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show. How did you get you started in the hospitality industry?
Well, it's funny. And thank you for mentioning the book and getting a copy of it. I talk a little bit about it in there because I sort of joke with people that I was the 12-year-old kid whose parents taught me to open bottles of wine so I could bartend at their Christmas party, which, I joke with them about that too, because maybe that doesn't sound the best, but yeah, I fell in love with hospitality when I was, before I was even a teenager, because I was helping, stock the fridge and seeing people having fun, and they're playing games while they're at the Christmas parties and holiday parties and stuff. And then I got to start, opening some wine and beer and, that kind of thing. And then I started working in an actual restaurant when I was 15 years old. So I've been in it forever. It's all I've ever really known. It's the best industry in the world, if you ask me.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. So what was obviously you've been doing consulting for a while. With Benchmark 60.
Right.
What was the turning point to start to write this? Because this has only come out in the last month or so, right? You've just
in the last couple of weeks. Yeah.
So what was the turning point for you?
Well, going back to when Benchmark 60 first started, the business, the consulting or advisory or whatever term you want to use, that actually started by accident. I was somebody who made a change during the pandemic because I didn't necessarily entirely agree with the way that the industry was going, and I wanted to try to help. I had friends that owned restaurants that were struggling, and I was also burnt out. I needed a change, and so I was going to take a break. I told myself that I was going to go on sabbatical because I thought it sounded cooler than being unemployed. And I think I told other people that too, to try to sort of nail it. But it was about 2 weeks before I accidentally found myself helping another restaurant and thought, okay, if this is what the actual industry is like everywhere, I really want to try and make an impact. So I guess, without really realizing it, the sort of path towards writing Bold Operations started then. It started, I was creating content and writing newsletters and trying to just provide insights and ideas on ways to maybe create some consideration around how to run an operation a little bit differently. And it just sort of compiled over the last 4 years or so. And there were some people who encouraged me to do it, and some people who said, I think that this stuff would look really good all in one place at one time. It was again a kind of an organic process. I never set out to say I'm going to go and write a book. It just kind of over the last few years has happened, and it's come together hopefully in a really good way to help people.
Yeah, because I think sometimes in the industry, especially like LinkedIn, I know you're a big user of LinkedIn and stuff like that. We get sound bites, and you get like a little blip of a podcast here and a little bit of written content there. But yeah, like it's never really, that's why I did the episode today, is because I don't think there's a spot where everybody goes, okay, these are the things you need to like budget for when opening a restaurant, because it's always just little blips and blops, and so combining it all together makes it a nice cohesive way to transfer information. So
yeah, it hopefully it goes well.
Yeah, I think it will, because I think that it is, in a world where there's so much information bouncing around, it's really sometimes hard to get all the pieces you need. So it is nice to have it. So with your work with Benchmark 60, what's the most common pitfall or operational blind spot you see when restaurants are coming to you?
It's quite often, well, it's about 90% of the different projects that we've taken on in the last few years are almost entirely related to, I'll say the broader version first, but business models in general, but more specifically around labor model and how to improve profitability or maintain profitability even while costs are going up, wages are going up, turnover is still through the roof. It's that people component of the business. It's things like understanding how team well-being affects the business model. It's that whole piece where it 10 years ago, it might have just been, let's just find out how to be more profitable. And now it's turning into, and we're seeing more and more every day around, how do I figure out how to just keep my people so that they can, become more experienced and more well-seasoned and more, confident in what they're doing, so that they can take even better care of the guest. And, people are starting to understand the overall cost of the people side of the business.
How do you put that across to owners? Because I'm in sort of the same field, and you talk to some owners and you're like, oh, well, only one person has the key to the wine fridge because we don't trust our staff not to steal. I'm like, well, that's a big issue. If you're not trusting your team to like look after your place, then it's more of a big fundamental issue than worrying about a key to the wine fridge. How do you put that across? Because I, as we were saying off in the green room, we're still treating the industry the way we did before the pandemic. This sort of turn and burn mentality. Like there's always a glut of staff that if you fired someone or someone left because of toxic environment, you'd always have someone to replace them. But in this generation, there's definitely less people willing to put up with that. How do you put that across the owner? Like, you're fundamentally screwing up.
Well, we do everything. We approach everything from a data perspective first. So I truly believe that there's one of the things that makes the consulting industry it gets painted with a bit of a negative brush sometimes, right? The restaurant consultant, there's this kind of weird sort of sometimes negative connotation to it, right? I truly believe that the biggest opportunity to help the restaurant industry is to help them better understand information, better understand data, because it'll help point us in the right direction to finding the solution. So the reason I say that is because the first thing we would do, whether it's the one key to the wine fridge or the general manager who thinks that they have to work 70 hours a week in order to be successful, or the chef who hoards information because they don't want to share, or they don't believe that sharing things will make them, they're worried that sharing information will make them obsolete. All of those things, we help operators first understand what the data is telling us. So one thing we would do is we would say, let's look at things like covers per labor hour and sales per labor hour in the restaurant, because those are metrics that help us understand levels of productivity. They also help us understand levels of workload, though. So if we see, for example, the covers per labor hour, which is just a ratio of how many guests you're serving versus how many hours you're using, if we see that number start to get too high, or consistently it is really high, what it actually tells us is that people are working too many hours for whatever reason, but they're working too many hours, which means they may be about to burn out. They may be, there could be mental health issues happening. There could be turnover that's about to happen. There could be all these different things, right? So we would start in that space and go, let's talk about what would happen if that wasn't so high. Let's talk about how to intentionally lower workload in the restaurant. Well,
I always
in order
live by
to
rule.
do that,
I live by rule that people lie, numbers don't.
100%. And the restaurant industry has operated based on intuition for a very long time. Right.
So when it comes to crunching data and you're taking that back to the ownership, how do they usually, like, how do you, again, as you said about restaurant consultants, there is, and again, it comes to that intuition. There's so many intangibles that you sort of like, oh, I know how it feels. When you take actually back hard data, how do you explain that to someone who's never, like, could have been in the industry for 25 years, but never looked at data the way that you're putting it across?
Yeah. Well, I believe that our role in the industry, Benchmark 60's role in the industry, and consultants' role in the industry in general is partly about advisory and partly about education. If there is a new, different way to look at things or a new lens to look through, well, yeah, there might be some learning there. Right. So one of the things that we talk about all the time is that consulting by opinion doesn't really work. Right. And that's, sometimes that's what creates friction between ownership and advisors or consultants. That what creates, lack of ROI or, frustration around, I spent all this money and didn't get what I was looking for in return. So everything is data driven, and it's very much about, if they don't understand the metrics or the way we're looking at it, then that's a big component of that is around the education.
That's a good point. With everything changing so fast, as we said, like staff turnover, with everything's changing so fast in the industry and always constantly evolving, how do you push your clients and how do you change up your direction when it comes to things changing like every couple of months, especially with staff turnover? Like, we do a big thing, like I was saying off camera, we got like 11% turnover at Clyde over the last 4 years.
Amazing.
A lot of that comes down to our training program. So we have proper certification courses, which in total for the whole entire year per staff member cost less than $1,000 to get proper actual certification courses. I always joke and say that I want to make my staff so trained and so knowledgeable that they're unhireable by anybody else. But really it's that tangible thing they can put on their resume to bulk themselves up. So if they ever do leave for whatever reason, they've got a good footing to get another job at a better price.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's amazing. Sorry.
So no, it's okay. So when it comes to everything changing so quickly, how do you keep abreast of all the new? Right now, I know that I put a survey out recently, and a lot of places are saying they're down 0 to 20% across the board. And I think that's a industry-wide sort of thing right now. Are you getting a lot more calls now with things going a little bit more south with the current situation in the market to go help me?
We get a lot of calls in the fall in general, typically, because how the conversation usually goes is summer was awesome. We made lots of money. September hits, we lose some staff. Our labor cost goes through the roof. We're worried about what the next few months is going to look like. I think I should reach out for some help. It's almost on repeat every September, regardless of what the minimum wage is or what's happening with cost of goods or inflation. Or it's sort of that same cycle that happens. But we are finding a lot of restaurants, I think, I talk a little bit about it in the book too, is that there's this massive uptick of technology in restaurants in the last few years, which also means that there's been this massive influx of data and information. And it's like drinking from a fire hose, right? I mean, we've all seen the restaurant manager that sits in front of their laptop for 2 or 3 hours on a Monday, just trying to read through all of the information, all of the data, all the reports, all the dashboards. So quite often where we try to make an impact first and we talk to operators first, it's just, what's the biggest challenge you're facing? Is it turnover? Is it labor cost? Is it food cost? Is it sales? Is it cover count? Is it, whatever it might be. And then we go and say, okay, let's see what the data is telling us around what's happening and run some scenarios on what if. So the one example that we've seen a bunch in the last 6 months is the late night version or the late night day part of restaurants. It's changing, right? From 2005 probably until the pandemic hit, there was the late night day part in restaurants was very competitive. It was very marketing driven. It was really busy in lots of restaurants. Get these late night happy hour events going on all over the place. And now what we're hearing is our late night, no matter what we do, seems to be dropping off. And I always ask, well, is it a guest count issue or is it a spend issue? Are you busy and people aren't buying anything? Or you got all these deals going, but nobody's coming in? So, we really try to help them understand what's happening first, what they're trying to accomplish, and then compartmentalize information so they can make really good decisions. Maybe they should just change their hours of operation, right? Maybe the late night happy hour thing's not going to work.
Do you think that the generational shift for Gen Z, I had a live stream with a gentleman last week that's sort of on this sobriety direction with this company and everything. Do you think Gen Z is going to impact the industry a lot more than most operators expect?
I think so. I think that they just operate differently, right? They maybe they're streaming something at home. Maybe they're not drinking alcohol and doing something else. Maybe they're, the nightclub thing has changed. The late night part of restaurants has changed, depending on the market. But yeah, I think that they're driving a lot of that right now. More people work from home. So, less people are still out maybe at that time. It is changing a lot. And I think really understanding, again, what the data is telling us. I was talking to an operator the other day about they have, the good old daily drink feature, and they have a daily food feature to go with it. And we were just talking, really sort of high level about it, but we were discussing the fact that if the promotion you have on any given day isn't either driving spend or traffic, it's not working. So if people aren't coming in for that promotion, meaning they might spend more money than they normally would, then they might just be coming in and seeing, oh, you've got a discounted drink. Now you're giving them an opportunity to spend less. So you have to be really careful about what some of these promotions and different discounts and things are, and what they're doing to the business model, because they can have a huge impact.
Yeah, I think before the pandemic, people assumed the drink features, people would drink 2, 3, or 4, like during happy hour or something like that. But then now, if it's just one, you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot. You've got bums and seats, but they're not spending the money that you need to cover that bum and seat.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's becoming more complex for sure.
So, with everything being the post-pandemic, how are you going to operators and trying to sort of shake them out of that old school mentality we're talking about when it comes to staffing, that per head spend, the cover counts, all these sort of things? You've got more of a finger on the pulse. Are a lot of operators still operating in the same sphere as they were pre-2019?
Yeah, a lot, actually. I actually had a conversation with someone the other day who said they asked us, can you help us put together some policy on how to deal with people in a way that isn't yelling at them? Because we just don't think it's working. And I mean, we've all heard the stories and some of us have witnessed it. You go back 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, you might get a frying pan thrown at you, right? So in a way, yelling at people is actually better than it used to be, but it's still not acceptable. So yeah, we're seeing operators that have done this for forever. This is how they've run their business. And now they're saying, so every time I yell at someone, they quit. I need to figure out a different way to do this, but I don't know what the alternative is. It's really, some of it is really deeply rooted in the history of hospitality and the tradition and that kind of stuff. But there's definitely a shift happening.
But that's the thing is I talk about it quite a lot, and I'm like, we as operators and industry people, older industry people, we should be leaving the industry better than what we walked into it. And trying to be empathetic. There's a fine line between yelling and screaming, like some old ways of like sacrificing and working a little bit harder, gaining your education, all these sort of things, and still being empathetic to what the Gen Z generation are looking for in the way of work-life balance. Sometimes I'm like, I'm too empathetic, and then other times I'm like, it's just a smidge of the old school stuff. Yeah, just to sort of show them like what you have to do to get to where you are.
Well, I think a smidge of the old school stuff is important too. I mean, the example that I would use is the restaurants are a 24-hour-a-day business, right? For the most part. And if you work at, let's say you're a bank teller, it's not a 24-hour-a-day business. You go home, you leave your work there. Well, I would always encourage people, if they want to move forward and get to a really high successful level in the restaurant industry, there are going to be times when you're going to have to work really hard and maybe go in on your day off and maybe work from home and maybe whatever those things might be. My sort of challenge to the industry is that can't be the norm anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Having the expectation that a general manager of a busy restaurant has to do all their admin on their day off from home. Well, if you're working on your day off, it's not your day off. So I think we need to challenge that sort of norm in the industry. But there are times when it's going to happen.
With your work-life balance, you're a champion for work-life balance. I see a post on LinkedIn quite a lot. And I'm bad for this as is. Like I have my very specific definition of what my work-life balance is comfortably. And I think every work-life balance, I think sometimes is very personal for most people.
Yeah.
How do you champion work-life balance for that industry? As you were saying, like that general manager who's doing his admin on his day off. How are you championing that in a one-to-one or operational based sort of sphere?
Well, first of all, I agree with you that everybody has different levels of work-life balance, right? I mean, me personally, maybe because I've been conditioned for a long time, just like you on it, but I agree. There's different sort of levels of work-life balance. I mean, I'd be happy to do a couple hours of work in the evening from home pretty much every day because it, helps me keep, on track. But the challenge, I would always just challenge people to think about it differently, right? I had an example when I was a GM of a restaurant, and I will never forget this. I was, pop in on my day off, call every, service that I wasn't there, work evenings and weekends and admin on my day off. I was that general manager. And the top person that I had, the most, she had so much potential. She's a rising star. She was like, I'm going, this person is going to replace me. She came to me one day out of nowhere and quit. And I was like, what do you mean? You're on this trajectory that you're going to have so much success. And she literally said, I don't want your job. And I said, hold on a second. I love my job and I love my lifestyle, and I still take vacation and I still do this, and I check in because I care, and I come in on my day off because I'm interested and curious. And she said, yeah, but to me, it looks like you never stop working. So I don't want your job. So I would challenge people to think about, some of it's about your work-life balance, but some of it's about the pipeline in the business and developing other people and what are they looking for? Because, some of that's the generational thing too.
Yeah. I've got my number two at Clive's, and she's like, I never want to do what you do. And like, she'll do services and she'll do all that sort of stuff. But she's like, I never want to do what you do, which is it's a nice thing to be aware of that. Because I think our generation was like, the progression was become general manager. That's what you do. Like, it doesn't really matter what you have to sacrifice to do that. You just do it because that's the natural progression. Same thing with ownership. Like, once you become general manager, you're going to open your own place eventually.
Yeah.
And then that's a whole bunch of other things that people don't really understand.
Another episode.
So for someone who picks up Bold Operations today and reads it, what can they implement from this? What's the number one thing that you would say implement from the book straight away tomorrow?
Well, there's two things in the book that I would say fall into that category. Some of it's longer term strategic type stuff, but the two things are, one is just the concept of people first leadership in the industry, and just really looking for ways to protect people from burnout, from mental health challenges, from could be what much worse, as we've all probably seen and experienced in hospitality. So that's the first takeaway, is just to consider everything that there is to do with having a people first approach to running a restaurant business. The second one actually would be based around the mental health challenges that exist in the industry, and just starting to create more awareness and that kind of thing. We do lots of work with the Burnt Chef Project that's doing incredible mental health work in 110 countries now, I think. So there's, I think it's really, really important to just have a good level of awareness about that. And then, I could go on and on, but there is lots of operational technology related, those kinds of things in the book too. But the people side of the business is where hopefully there's the most takeaway for people.
Do you think with the mental health thing there, we're a little bit more open to talking about our mental health? Like I do it very regularly, and I'm pretty open with my team. If I'm feeling burnt out, I'll say, hey, like, just because I'm quiet doesn't mean I'm angry, because that's usually what people think when you're a 6'5", 320-pound gorilla like me. Like, if you look upset, if you look quiet, you're like, obviously you're mad at something or someone. And obviously Gen Z is definitely much more in tune with their feelings than we are. As operators, do you think it's our duty to sit down with a lot of our team once every month or once every couple of months, especially when we see things? Like, I'm sure we're both old school, so like, you know that there's always been that one person on your team or one person in your industry circle that you drink too much, you party a little too hard, and then something horrific happens, and you're like, I wish I'd talked to you about this beforehand instead of like letting you get away with it. Do you think as operators we need to be a little bit more confident and a little bit more open to talking about these sort of things?
Well, 100%. And one of the roadblocks on that is that, especially as a business operator, I mean, you open yourself up to risks potentially, right? But I think we owe it to the people that work in the industry. I think we owe it to the former version of the industry and the future of the industry. And I do think that it takes some courage to be able to sit down with someone on your team and say, hey, are you okay? Is everything all right? Is there anything I can do for you? I'm worried about you, any of those things. And we do talk about that in the book a little bit around some strategies around how to do that, whether it's, having some committees on the team or some, a well-trained group of people who are looking out for those kinds of things, or even on the flip side, the more positive side of creating, reward and recognition that is peer driven, that helps people stay positive in the workplace and, those types of things. So I think we definitely have a responsibility around that.
You were mentioning tech earlier, and tech has always been one of those things. I'm still a hardcore Excel guy. Like I love my Excel spreadsheets. It's just like I still put in my cover count, and I know how much per head spend is and all that sort of stuff. I track a lot more through Excel than other things. But the creep of technology, you can go a little too far. Like I talked about tech a couple of weeks ago about cutting costs, and one of my buddies, he runs his parents' 40-year-old restaurant, and when we did the renovations there, he actually got sensors that are all Bluetoothed for all the fridges and freezers. So if they ever go down below a certain temperature, they'll send a notification, and he'll know exactly it logs it, so that's an actual digital log for like the health inspector and everything, which is a crazy amount of tech for like a restaurant in general. What are the best tech things that you're seeing coming to the restaurant that not only gives you really good hard crunching data, as we were talking about earlier, but also pretty user friendly?
So there's a group in the US called Harry that they're not in the Canadian market yet, for anyone who's in the Canadian market listening, but I think they're coming. They do some of the best stuff around employee sentiment that I've seen, where it's, some of it's AI driven and that kind of thing, but they have automated ways of staying really in tune with how the team is feeling about how, just coming to work, how they feel about it. Whether that's management, about how the shift went, any of those types of things. And they're proactive with it. So they're, someone might work 2 weeks in a restaurant. Well, we know that based on the data that the average employee in a restaurant in Canada right now, the average employee lasts 52 days if they're going to quit.
Really?
So of the people who quit in the first 90 days, they last 52 days.
Wow. So
that tells us that onboarding is an opportunity and workload is an opportunity and culture shock in a restaurant might be an opportunity, right? So, they'll proactively address those things by saying, hey, we noticed that you worked with Sean on your shift yesterday and you're 2 weeks in. How did it go? There's some, so we can start to collect some information around how things feel. And then they'll actually share reporting and information with operators straight to their email, so they don't have to log in, saying this restaurant on this day, the team is saying that it was a tough shift. You might want to check in with them. So, some of that stuff, I think the more proactive way to use technology to protect the team is valuable. I think the reporting side of and how the technology part of the restaurant industry presents information and data, I think needs some work because there's still so much interpretation involved. And sifting through information to try to come to some sort of conclusion still takes too long. But I think there's lots of good stuff coming around the people side of the industry.
I did like the labor hours one that you did. Like, I just know because I can see my spreadsheets in the morning. Like, if we have a low per head spend and my team stayed late, it means that we got a late hit and everybody just came in for drinks after like 9 o'clock. No one had dinner. And my per head spend was down. My covers were up. Team had to stay late. But the labor hour one is a big one that I don't think people completely understand how much you should be spending per labor hour for how much money you're bringing in.
Mhm.
And then with the
Yeah.
staffing issues, they think they'll cut costs and then still be delivering an amazing guest experience.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so how do you sort of, because that's the big one, like people tell me, oh, I cut this supply because this one was cheaper, but the product was less than.
Mhm.
I cut staff down to minimal so that it made sense. Like, again, it comes down to, like, our place is a little bit different. Like, Clive's is a lounge, so we have a very big cocktail program. We're known as a cocktail bar, but we have an amazing kitchen, amazing chef in the kitchen. We can do 100 covers, and it could be anywhere from $27 a head to $40 a head.
Right.
Still needs the same amount of staff.
Totally.
So how do you go about talking to customer clients about, listen, if you cut staff, they're not going to give a good experience. The good experience then leads to a low per head spend. So you, again, butts and seats, but the money that you bring in is not isn't covering the butts and seats.
So we help them understand that labor costs in restaurants it's a long game.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to fluctuate every day, no matter what they do about it. Right. So you might have a day where you serve 100 guests and your team is fully staffed and the average check is $27. Right. Happens. Your labor cost percentage is what it is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But if the next day you have the same amount of staff working and you do 100 covers and they spend $40, your labor cost is going to be dramatically lower on that day, percentage wise, based on the revenue per head than it was the day before. So, there's no point in saying, oh, were we short staffed today because labor costs looked really low. It's just a result of how the guests behaved.
Mm-hmm.
But what if they come in on the third day and you're fully staffed, you serve 100 guests and they spend $15 for some reason? Now your labor cost percentage goes through the roof.
Yeah.
But it's not because someone did a bad job. It's just because the guest didn't behave the same way. So this is just an example of how we help operators compartmentalize information, because that low spend day, the $15 spend day, maybe that's a marketing issue. Maybe the wrong drink feature was on and we shouldn't continue to do that because it's driving guest check down. Those types of things, versus if it went the other way and guest spend was exactly the same every day, but cover count fluctuated, we'd see the same thing happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, now it's not an operational discussion. It's about how to drive guest count. So the more we can compartmentalize that data and really understand what's going on, the easier it is for operators to say, I need to work on guest spend on Tuesdays, not going to the GM and saying, build sales.
Yeah.
Right.
Or
and then the
cutting
GM
staff.
goes, do you know how much other stuff I have going on?
Yeah.
I'm here 60 hours a week.
Yeah, exactly. So when it comes to new operators who are just thinking about getting into the game, what's your biggest piece of advice tying in bold operations? The biggest piece of advice you can give someone who might be listening, who's thinking about opening a restaurant or a bar or in the process of it? Because I think, as we said, like, there's still little blips and blops when it comes to information out there. It's never really like all in one spot. What's your biggest piece of advice for new operators when it comes to opening their venues?
Hire more staff than you think you need. Because the minute that you're spread thin, or any of them are, everything gets harder. So, we're having this conversation in multiple different areas right now with lots of different operators. Hire more staff than you think you need, because there's always going to be turnover, to even if it's only 11%, which is still, which is incredible. There's always going to be some turnover. There's always an opportunity to upgrade the team. And the more time that you have to work on that team and not having to do a bunch of things yourself, the easier everything will be. So that's where we would that's the piece of advice I would give first.
Nice. So what's the plan for you for the next 6 to 12 months?
Oh, geez. There's a lot. I mean, we've recently been lucky enough to be part of the group that purchased Le Crocodile by Rob Feeney in Vancouver. So spending lots of time there and actually making sure that, we're not only preaching what operators should do, but that we're actually doing it ourselves in our own place. So lots of that kind of stuff. Hopefully a few discussions about bold operations, but really going into the winter, there's typically lots of stuff happening in terms of, speaking and talking about some of the scenarios that are going on in the industry, and trying to just make sure that we're, I think the Christmas and New Year part of the calendar, I always find to be fascinating. So we usually get really busy around, in November, around helping operators understand how to not leave money on the table at Christmas time or in the holidays, and that they actually might not be losing enough money in January, which probably sounds crazy. But if you think about that average guest average guest spend conversation we were having, people go out more and spend more around the holidays, and they go out less and spend less in January.
That first quarter.
So that business model piece is a really big part of what we're working on this time of year.
So with Le Crocodile, has it been interesting? Because Le Crocodile has been around for what, 30 years?
40.
Longer? 40
Yeah.
years. Has it been interesting to implement a lot of the mantras that you hold with Benchmark 60 into a space that is so old because of staff and all that sort of stuff? Like Pagliacci's, when we renovated and reopened Pagliacci's, like there was the head chef there, started off as a dishwasher in 1979, and he's the head chef and he's been there for that long, and servers that have been there since 1982. And so doing this new implementation of culture and that sort of thing was very, very interesting, especially from my point of view. Has it been interesting to take over that space and implement some of these things that are good for the industry, but definitely not grounded in that old world mentality?
Yeah, for sure. It's been interesting. It's been educational. It's been eye-opening. It's been a really, it's been a slower process than I expected it to be honest. Mostly because the place is, we're lucky that it's busy, and we're trying to really get a grasp of what the whole model looks like. So, as we're trying to work on culture things and, people and retention and training strategies, we're also trying to, learn the business model and what is this going to look like long term. An example is that we opened the place doing Tuesday to Saturday dinners. And in the last 3 weeks, we've added 4 lunch services and 2 more dinners. So, there's always just different moving parts happening. But it's, I was speaking to a member of the team this morning about, that we think that there's some good things happening, but still there's so much opportunity there.
Well, because it's always been that, like, well, this is the way it's always been mentality. Like, that's the per head spend. That's what we always spend. Like, they only come in for 1 glass of wine, and then they do appetizers, mains, and desserts. And Mrs. and Mrs. Smith, who have been coming here for 40 years, says that's exactly what they do every single time they come in.
Yeah. Well, and on the staff side too, half the staff were existing team members that worked there before, and half of them are people that we've hired since we reopened the business. So, we might have a sous chef, for example, that just says, well, we should just be working 12 hours every single day. And then the new sous chef that we hired goes, well, I'm at 9 hours right now. I'd like to go home. So it's interesting that way, how there's, like you said, the way it's always been versus the way we would like it to be.
Yeah, we do a 12-hour day. We get paid a day rate. You get paid no overtime, and that's what you do. You come in early, you prep, you do service, and you go home. And you do that every day. Oh, wow. Old school. So we're at that stage in the podcast where I ask the 5 deep questions for my guest. This is something that I like to do, and I always get people offside because it's they do get very deep. What is the one lesson or experience that has shaped your perspective the most, and how do you carry that forward in your life?
I had to pause there for a second. One of my mentors, when I was probably 25 years old, I'd maybe been a GM for a year, maybe not even. I was about to sit down and terminate an employee. And this mentor of mine said, hey, what are you going to go talk to that person about? And I said, I have to fire them. And he goes, okay, here's a challenge for you. He said, I bet you can't sit down with that person and fire them and have that conversation in such a meaningful and positive way that they get up and thank you and shake your hand. And I went, what do you mean? I'm firing them. Like, they're going to be so upset with me. Anyway, I'll never forget that conversation, and sort of how I probably struggled through that at the time. But that's sort of become a filter for how to speak to people. Because if the filter in it's not always good, we're not always going to accomplish it, right? But if the filter in my mind is always that I want this person to feel positive about our interaction, it helps to sort of shape the way that you communicate with people. So that's probably how I would answer that one.
That's awesome. If you could leave one lasting message or piece of wisdom for the world, what would it be and why?
For the world.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this applies to the restaurant industry and outside of the restaurant industry. Just the concept of protecting people is really important to me, and I would encourage the world to work harder at protecting people from undue stress, from mental health issues, from whatever it might be.
Awesome. Looking back on your journey, what is something you wish you had understood earlier in life?
Earlier life. These are deep, good questions. This is tough. Looking back at my journey, what's something I wish I understood? I think I wish I would have known more about how mental health challenges can appear and how they can affect people. I'm very lucky that I've never had anything kind of, over the top happen mentally in my life, but lots of friends and family that have, and, we all have our own challenges. So I probably wish I would have either been more aware or done more homework about what that would have been like in advance.
How do you define success, and has your definition changed over time?
It definitely has. Definition of success for me earlier in my career was about climbing the ladder. I was always hyper competitive about trying to move forward in the industry. And now I think success for me is definitely different. It's more about helping other people move forward and accomplish what they're trying to do. And it's about how my family life feels and goes. A quick example, while you've opened restaurants, the feeling of opening restaurants is like, well, I had been basically for the last 4 years running my own business, working 75% from home, spending lots of time and, making dinner and doing bedtime with my kid every night. And then I opened a restaurant. And it was really interesting because I felt very unsuccessful, where from a business perspective, it probably looked like this is going great. Right. And I felt very unsuccessful from a family perspective for a short period of time. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing the pandemic definitely did for me, is that I spent like 6 months opening 3 places in Singapore, and I was away from my family for 6 months. I had a break in between, but like it was a 3-month stint. Didn't phase me. Now I go away for 2-3 days. I'm like, I miss my wife like straight away and my daughter straight away. Like, outside looking in, it's like business is great, but then pandemic changed everything.
Yeah.
What do you hope your legacy will be, and what steps are you taking to build it?
I hope my legacy is just to, like I've sort of been talking about, just encourage the industry to look at things through a bit of a different lens. That the people working in the industry now, they're just not willing to accept what the rest of us have for a very long time. Right. And so I think my legacy, I would hope, is just to, if I can encourage or support or help a few people look at how to run that part of the industry differently, then that'll be a win. That's
awesome. So, Bold Operations, available on Amazon. I got my copy off Amazon. Anywhere else you'd suggest to go get it?
Amazon's the best place to get it. Yep. We're working on a few other channels. There's an audio version coming out shortly.
Nice. See, I'm much more of an audiobook guy. Like, I've listened to that like multiple times so far.
Yeah. And if you have any issues trying to get a copy, and I'm always available. Send me a note.
But it is a fantastic book, man. Like, even if you're an old school operator and you just want to look at a nice looking glass into the outside world a little bit and get outside your echo chamber, this is one for you. And if you're just about to open a place, read this as well. So I want to say thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy, so anytime you get to come and spend time with me, and the insights you gave us today were just fantastic.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, man. I'll chat to you very soon.
Cheers.
Thanks, buddy. Bye. Thanks for listening, Pose Shifters. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really enjoy sitting down with friends and peers and just chatting about the industry and getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's really going on out there. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, everything on all the platforms. Just hit it up and I'll do my best to answer any queries or questions you have. I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.